Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. So we're finally outside. The weather is so pretty and nice now, and I've got all my plants going on, and it's kind of gotten me thinking I need to redo my planter boxes. I made some probably, I want to say 4 years ago, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just sort of like slapping some wood together, and they didn't really hold up. I don't personally think planter boxes are something that necessarily last forever, but it is definitely time to redo them. I'm going to try to mend or correct some of the things that I saw as being a problem the last time, while also adding kind of a cool, fun, different style to these ones. And while we're on that topic, I should mention the style that I'm going to do for these, and something you should keep in mind when you're applying some fixture to the front of your house is you really have to take the architecture of your house into consideration. This is not a very fancy Gothic Victorian looking house. It's got a lot of straight lines, and if I were to do something that was excessively embellished on it, it would look foreign or odd on the building. So I am going to try to design something that sort of flows with the house and sort of just accentuates it, makes it prettier from the street. And I think I'm ready to get started, so let's get going. My first step is going to be to design a silhouette for my box. One of the neatest bonuses of making things like this yourself is you really don't have to compromise as far as normally when you go out and buy something, you kind of find something that's as close as you can to what it is that you want. But when you make it yourself, you really kind of end up getting exactly what you want. Once I'd cut out my main piece with a jigsaw, I laid it down on top of other pieces and traced out the design just so I wouldn't have to redesign it over and over again. Trying to determine where these boards were going to meet and what the degrees that I needed to make those cuts were was kind of a process, and I had to just take each piece at a time. And what I mean by a process is, I mean it was frustrating. Okay, so for some weird reason, the temperature dropped dramatically outside. So I ended up just kind of calling it a day, came inside, and was thinking I was going to go right back out there again this morning. And instead, it was somehow even colder. So I was like, what can I do inside to sort of keep progressing with this project? And I realized I knew I wanted to sculpt something kind of fun and spooky in the center of my flower boxes, and something that I could duplicate over and over. And there's no reason I can't just do that in the living room with the heater going and watching a movie and playing with this dirty little goofball. So that is my current plan. I'm going to use Sculpey. It's kind of a technique that I've done in previous episodes, but it's just like the best thing ever. So that's what I'm doing, and I think I'm ready to begin. To prevent wasting clay, it's nice to just sort of ball up some aluminum foil and have that as like the core inside, and that way your clay goes a lot further, it stretches. Okay, so I'm gonna do something, I would say a little bit edgy on the face of mine. I'm going to sculpt a human skull and put some like pretty flowers around it so it looks feminine. My cameraman kind of was like, no, I don't think you should do that. That's like the front of the house. And I was like, well, I don't really care if people think I'm weird. So, and I don't know, maybe it'll slow down the number of strangers that come and knock on the door. So I don't know. It depends on what you want to represent the front of your house. And I personally don't mind if it's something that scares people. So if you don't want to do a skull, you could do something sort of subtly eerie, like an owl or a hawk or something that symbolizes kind of the area that you live in. If it's the desert, it could be a snake, or I don't know, just pretty much anything you can think of that's sort of fun and pretty. So I'm going to begin on this and hopefully it'll come out neat. As this was beginning to take shape, I was feeling really excited about it. And then my sort of mouthy captive looked down at it and he said, huh, it looks sort of like a Guns N' Roses album cover from the 80s. And I stopped and I Googled that and I was like, dang it. So I don't know. I love Guns N' Roses. I'm a big fan, but I don't really want that on the front of my house. So I had to sort of scrap this idea and try something different. It's never terribly fun to get criticism as an artist, but the honest truth is, it really does make you a better artist to get it from probably just a few people that you trust and know. And I would say, I don't know, you want to limit obviously who you're getting criticism from down to people that you know have like your best interest at heart and and at at their base like what you do, because sometimes you lose your perspective while working on something and you need a set of fresh eyes, and it is always frustrating to have to start over on something, but ultimately I think this actually was for the best. The best way to smooth polymer clay before you bake it is to brush a generous amount of rubbing alcohol all over the details and just keep working with it because it kind of melts the top layer just a little bit, enough to sort of smooth things out. And it's kind of a way to essentially sand this item before you bake it. I'm drawing one side of my silhouette on parchment paper, and then I'm actually going to fold that parchment over in half, and it'll leave you an outline that you can see and then trace on the other side, and that way you end up with something that's perfectly symmetrical and balanced. It's a good idea to incorporate some wire into anything that's going to be stretching across like a decent amount of space. And the bonus to this is if something does crack at some point, which is not terribly unusual, it does hold together so it doesn't cause too much of a problem and just kind of gives it some extra strength. I really didn't want my parchment sliding all over the place, which is absolutely what it wanted to do. So I stapled it to the board that I was working on and then hammered down the staples just because they were going to start catching my fingers and breaking nails and God knows what else. Another of the incredible bonuses of working with polymer clay is it will not set until you bake it. So you can just work as long as you need, and then you can even go to sleep and come back the next day and it will still be workable. And I like that because I've said it before, I am so slow with the art that I do. And this owl sculpture took me a little over 3 days to pull off. So I really appreciate the added bonus of sort of being able to set it aside, take a break, and then come back to it. This inner wing part sort of caused me a good amount of grief just because I kept designing leaves and thinking I liked the placement, and then I would take a picture, step back and look at that picture, and then go, no, I don't think that's right. So finally, I did end up coming up with an interior design for that wing that I just felt like really made the whole thing pop. This thing was way too big for my oven, so I ended up just sort of baking one half at a time and then sealing it off with aluminum foil. Now, obviously, this is not ideal, but I almost want to say I've built most of my career off of figuring out ways to do things that most people need, like a warehouse. And really, there are sort of hacks to get around that you can sort of pull this off even in a smaller house. I'm spraying the baked clay with a high gloss sealer, and this will prevent it from sticking to the mold material I'm about to use. The product I'm using is called Smooth On, and it comes in several different types. This one actually sets very quickly. I think you have a 5-minute working time, so I had to work kind of annoyingly fast. They sell ones that set in like about 8 hours, I want to say, and for this, I honestly would have preferred that just because you end up with a cleaner sort of finished mold, but this is what I had on hand, so I'm working with what I've got. Using a vibrator against the cardboard is a really great way to knock out any sort of stowaway air bubbles. For some reason, I always find this to be the scariest part because it's sort of like this was all of the Smooth On that I had to use. So I was really hoping, obviously the mold was going to release for one, and then for two, that it was actually going to be a good mold and not something that was filled with air bubbles or had some other weird hiccup that I hadn't anticipated. But it all worked perfectly, and now I get to use the Hydra Stone. I absolutely love this product. You can order it online. I'll give a link to what I like the most. But basically, you just mix a little bit of water in at a time, and I don't even use a measuring system for this. It's just I'm eyeballing it. I'm really looking for almost like a pancake batter consistency. One of its many incredible bonuses is you kind of have a decent amount of time to sort of fiddle and work with it and make sure there's no air bubbles. But then after that, it sets pretty fast. I want to say about 30 minutes. It's almost like a rock-like texture. And it always releases very easily from these silicone molds. Now I just need to make a few more cuts before putting together my planter box. I'm going to initially assemble this by applying wood glue and clamps and making sure that it's square and perfectly aligned. And then once I know it is, I'm going to start using a brad nailer to really pull it all together permanently. These projects don't always go perfectly smoothly at every turn, but in this particular segment of the process, it's so satisfying and fun when those wood pieces just sort of click together and everything looks perfect with no sort of need for adjustment. One of the design flaws that I created on my first set of boxes that I made was you're supposed to have like sort of punched holes underneath so that the water can release, and my holes were not big enough. And eventually what happened was the boxes kind of began to like warp and change their shape a little bit, which sort of pulled them apart. With this, I'm actually going to be leaving these gaps, and with the angles, the water will just run straight out of there and nothing has a chance to pool or collect. You know you've got a good bond with the wood glue when the glue starts to bleed out of the seams once you've clamped it. To affix these permanently, I'm going to pre-drill out some areas for the screws. You don't want any tension with the screw because it will cause the hydrostone to break. So you're just kind of using this as something that is absolutely going to keep it affixed to the wood, and then I'm even going to seal it with some caulking on the back just to make sure it doesn't wiggle or move around. One of the last steps before painting is going to be to fill any cracks with a wood filler and then kind of even go in with a little bit of spackle to cover up the tops of those screws. I absolutely love listening to audiobooks while I work on projects, and the book I'm currently listening to is Fortune's Children: The Fall of the House of Vanderbilt. It's a book written by a descendant of the Vanderbilt family, and it is super, super interesting and kind of gives you a different perspective on these grand, like sort of Gilded Age mansions that you see. And I don't know, I haven't quite finished it, but it is definitely keeping my interest. Something that is unavoidable about putting soil or dirt next to wood is that it will cause the wood to begin to deteriorate. And so my neighbor had this great suggestion of using a really heavy duty plastic, stapling it in along the top, and then putting potting soil into that. And then that will prevent any dirt from sitting directly against the actual boards And then obviously you punch a bunch of holes through the plastic just to make sure that the water can escape. Whenever you're going to affix something like this, you always want to pre-drill first. And what this does is it creates a pathway so that when you insert your screw, you're not going to do anything like split the wood, and it just helps the bonding process. The last step before inserting all of the fun plants and doing the best part is to just kind of go over and make sure that if there's any like flaws or anything that isn't quite perfect, just to touch them up and make sure it looks amazing. And it's completely finished. I know in the beginning of the episode I said I was going to do something simple, but then creativity sort of got the better of me, and I went a little nuts with this owl design. But the thing that I like about it so much is anywhere I move, I have this mold, so I can kind of just punch out this cool thing that I've created anywhere I go. So this property, I feel like, needs about 9 total of these boxes. So I've got a lot of work to continue doing if I want to make all of those. But I don't know, it was very, very fun, and it came out so much better than the previous planter box, which was like my first foray into any sort of planter box fun. I would be very wary about anything I showed you as far as planting goes. I'm good at all sorts of things, and keeping plants alive is not one of them. So this is the best these will ever look. Anyhow, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I've got a couple more that are really exciting coming up very soon. So I will see you very soon, and have a great day. One last tip I forgot to mention is that if you really want your planter box to pop, there is no law against inserting a few artificial pieces just to kind of instantly give it that really grown-in finished look.